Welcome to the HC podcast. We are the Harvest Chronicles.
Mhm.
We are happy to have you here. How
Thanks
are
so
you?
much. Thanks so much. I'm honored to be invited. I'm doing good. Yeah.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Before we even start,
Mhm.
we've got a tradition in this house where the previous speaker leaves questions for
For
our
the
next
next.
guest.
Okay.
Yes. So in front of you, there's a brown bowl, and
All
I
right.
want you to select just one piece of paper and read
Okay.
out the question and answer for us.
All right.
So you only have 15 seconds if
To
you want
answer
to
the
think.
question.
No, to think.
To think.
And then you can answer.
Okay.
All the best. Oh, sorry, my timer should be on.
Okay.
We have exactly 1 hour.
So I can read it. Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
If there's anything you could change in the current norm of society, what would it be? That's it has to be one thing, I suppose. I mean, two things. Because I'm a feminist, I'd say just the gender imbalance and gender-based violence. Definitely, I would change the fact that gender is such a thing of contestation, where it's a matter of life and death for people. I would change that. But I'm also inclined to be like, I would change the way Africans see themselves, and I would wish for Africans for their awareness and consciousness of their identities to be their first point of departure. Because I think oftentimes the current the way society is currently set up, people are coming into themselves, and I was like, I would rather change that, where you are certain of yourself and then come into other ideas and other ways of being, and then be like, oh, that other Western religion, that other Western thought, but I know who I am. So I would change that. But I mean, if I had to choose one, I would say GBV.
Okay.
Or just the current state of how we think about gender. Yeah.
Okay. And why is that particularly important for you?
I think because it's a life and death issue. I think the other as well is a life and death issue. But more so because I think the policies that have been placed in the country in terms of trying to eradicate violences and respond to violences on queer bodies and women bodies and just people who don't subscribe to the norm of what it means to be a man or woman, I don't think that we are succeeding in implementing that. The justice system is also grappling with it. Society is grappling with it. And so for me, it seems like in a very real way for Africans, one of the biggest things we have to do as a people is to figure out what our stance is on gender.
Okay.
I think that's across the continent. I think our major contestation as Africans is gender. And wherever those ideas about gender come from.
Is that why you are now drawn so much into feminism? And sorry.
Yeah.
There's two questions there.
Yeah.
What is feminism? Because I often have conversations with friends of mine around what feminism really is.
Yeah.
And the general response we often get, or what is normally discussed today, is that feminism is basically about equal rights for both men and women.
Yeah.
But what does that mean?
Yeah.
What are equal rights? What does that look like?
So let me start with what draws me to feminism. I grew up in a home where there was mostly women or girl children. And I grew up in a house. My mom is a Capricorn. So that's a very assertive, authoritative, task-orientated sign.
Yeah.
My mom was a teacher and my dad was an artist. He's a Sagittarius. So those are adventurous people. And so my mom was very organized. And in some ways, Capricorns are also considered to be stubborn signs.
Is that where you get it from?
You know what? I'm a Scorpio, but my rising is Capricorn. So I come across as a Capricorn, stubborn, task orientated, all of that. So I grew up. I remember I did a an oral in Afrikaans class. We call it a mondeling, right? So I'm from the Northern Cape, so Afrikaans is one of the languages I speak. And it was a mondeling, and it was about who's your role model. And really my speech was about my mom, about how my mom curates my father's identity. What, the thing where you're like, Nkoskazi, you pick out my clothes. I'm like, that's a huge responsibility you give on someone. So how you are seen in the world. So dress became such an important thing for me. How you dress, how people see you dress. My mother would pick out his clothes, not all the time. He wasn't a child. But to some extent, he would say, I have this meeting, or I have this, I have that. And she would organize sort of that type of stuff. So I was like, my father's identity in the outside world is largely because of how my mother chooses to curate it. And perhaps that's how their marriage functioned.
Yeah.
So when I went to university, and then when I was in primary, I was head girl. When I was in high school, I was head girl. And so for me, I grew up in a world where I was the last born, so I could do whatever I wanted to do, right? And then I went to varsity, and then I started seeing gender imbalance. I was like, what the hell is going on in the world? I am so confused. I don't know what there's a place for people, and there's a place for this based on your body. I was so confused. And I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to speak up for women who were told there's a place for them, And then I sat in literature class one day. I majored in politics and in history, but literature was one of my electives. I sat in an African literature class, and we read Tsitsi Dangaremba's Nervous Condition.
Oh no!
Hey! Listen, if I see that woman, I might kiss her feet.
I love Tsitsi.
And Nervous Condition really is about these 5 women who have different ways in how they articulate their womanhood based on their conditions, but also based on their aspirations. And all of them are dealing with the nervousness of how their womanhood is positioned in contrast, maybe, but parallel or in community with all the other different femininities. Of course, that's my reading of it. There are different articulations of it. And I was like, yeah, there are different ways to be women. And then this white male lecturer was talking about how, African women are relegated to domestic things, and all they do in their homes is cook and clean. And I was like, my mother's never been upset taking care of a home. So I don't know what you're talking about. She's not oppressed. So I don't think you should decide if the people are oppressed because of the decisions they make. And then I was like, I'm leaving this class. This is just not working out for me. So sorry, I come into feminism as a theory. And then I start to realize, oh, wait, there's this thing called African feminism, which rejects that very same thing, where people come and say, as African women, we must come and save you. The thing you've been relegated to, the thing I've been doing happily, and Nervous Condition shows you that there's people doing different things. There's Tsitsi who just wants to go to school.
Yeah.
There's her mother who just wants to be a wife. And all of these people are fine. And I was like, the problem with mainstream feminism, Western feminism, is that it creates a feminist narrative where we model ourselves against this thing that is anti-patriarchy, which I think is valid for white people, because first wave and second wave of feminism emerge out of the discourses of women must be relegated to the kitchen, you're not allowed to vote. Those are all European and American problems. African feminism, which I subscribe to, emerges to say, but when you were fighting for women's rights, you were fighting for white women's rights. You were not fighting for black women's rights. So when you read some of the old scholarship on the first wave and second wave of feminism, which I think is still taught in Feminist 101 classes, Simone de Beauvoir, when she talks about women, she says la femme, so French meaning female. But when she speaks about black women, she says la noire, meaning black. So why are you making a distinction between black women and white women? So African feminism comes to say, well, your feminism is actually racist. How then do we craft a feminist ideology of justice to capture the lived experiences of African women. There's struggles there, but there are forms of agencies as well, where we choose to be women in the home, or you choose to be women outside of the home. But those are lived experiences that Western and mainstream feminism doesn't account for, because it has decided that someone forced me to be in the kitchen and wash dishes. So to answer the feminist question is to say there are different kinds of feminism. And I think oftentimes when people come across feminism, they come across liberal feminism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And the liberal one is the one that you refer to as Western.
Oftentimes, liberalism comes from Western ideology, yes. So, yes.
And if I may, you write about what we are going to be talking about now.
Yeah.
You write about African women leaders not belonging within the cultures of academic institutions.
Yeah.
If I'm framing it correctly.
Yeah, the institutional culture, yeah.
Okay. Is Titi the one who sold you to adopting the African feminism ideology when you conducted the study?
So I read Titi years ago, and I became a I was probably 18 I was 18 when I read it, and I had come across the word feminist before, probably when I was 15. And I was like, oh, it's this thing where women become whoever they want to be, or something like that. That's what it was. I was like, okay, sure. I was a teenager. I was like, oh, okay, whatever that is. But when I started reading Titi, I was like, okay. And then I started exposing myself to different literatures. I do this work probably 4 years after reading Titi, where I do have a background of African women's lived experiences and so forth. So yes. But I do women in the university very later on, because but they're not exclusive of each other. I think this work comes out of my master's thesis. My master's thesis comes out of me walking into the classroom and never have been lectured by a Black woman at university.
What?
To date.
Which universities did you go to?
I went to only one university in Africa. I've never been lectured by a Black woman, ever.
That's why I get professors that tell you that the role of an African woman is to be in the kitchen doing 1, 2, and 3.
A white professor was telling me that, and this is like post 2010. Like, you know. So I've never been taught by. I had 2 Black males and one African. So she, I don't know how she identifies, but by South African categorization, it would be colored. And then all were white women and white men. I've never been taught by I cite Black women. I cite African Black women.
I saw you cite a lot of Blacks generally, not just African women.
Yeah.
Okay, at least according to the article that I read. That's very interesting. And is this at University X?
Yes.
Shucks.
Yeah.
I never would have imagined.
So part of why my master's also took long is the literature part is that I was like, I'm not going to write African feminist work. I'm not going to write about African women and not cite African women. So I spent a lot of time trying to find them. And I did a lot of that. And so what I do is, and it's part of what happens when you read Thabiseng Motseme's work, and I think her master's is in what they call is it that cultural studies? Where and so and she's all about, you don't have to cite in your discipline. So if you read my work, you will see it's really interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
Which is why you probably thought I was in sociology, not in political science. Yeah. So I didn't find in my discipline much. Besides Parazima Gadla, Yolanda Boka, and those are mostly international relations scholars. And I was doing mostly political ideology at the time. So I was very intentional about citing. I fought for that thing to the very last. Where I don't cite African women, it's also because it's justified, because I also think other knowledges from different geographies are also important. And because I also believe in decolonization, I also don't think that Africa must only be the centered. I think it must be the start for me, because that's where I'm from. but I don't think that it must be superior to other geographies. And so I do include citations from other geographies, but very limited. And I'm quite intentional about it. I'm like, whoever comes from that geography will cite. You cite the people you know. I agree, you French, you cite the French.
Of course.
It's not my responsibility to cite them.
You're telling me about La Vida, La whatever.
So, yeah.
Sipogazi, just to come back close to the conversation.
Yeah.
So we are talking about your paper titled African Women Leaders, Non-Belonging, and Construction of New Cultures and Citizenship in South African Higher Education.
Yeah.
Whew, what a mouthful.
Yeah.
So this is a leadership conversation, as I take it. And my first question for you is, why is it important for us at this current time, 2023, preaching into 2024, to be having such a conversation? Why is this important for us?
Remember, I told you I come from a background where my mother was in charge.
Yes.
So I'm confused when women are not in charge. Like my body memory, it's a system default. So I'm confused when I live in a world where women are not in charge. I don't know what's going on. And I think it's important because, so I did this research because I was like, why is the space like this? Why is the university like this? What's happening? And the literature will tell you that the university was created for elite men who were studying theology, who were studying political science, and the university is a Western Greek design, right? The way in which we understand the university now.
Yeah.
Of course, we already have pre-existing universities of the oldest on the continent, in Mali, in Timbuktu. We know that. And there's one of the oldest that was actually created by a woman that people don't often talk about. I think it's Mali as well. And so for me, it's to say, so I'm in this space and I'm here, and this is an abnormality for me personally. It's an abnormality. And I'm like, oh, okay. Then I get to a point where I'm like, oh, women are coming to lead. Okay, this is great. And then I realize the space is not very welcoming. You have to fight to be in the space. And so my curiosity is that what is the space that thinks it's normal to say you don't belong here? And I'm in this space. So I think we must navigate the world comfortably as possible. So I come into a space, I'm like, why are other people here and others are not here? Even at home, you're like, hi, this is my home, but I'm hospitable to you. So I'm like, why is this space not hospitable? Why do women have to contest to be here? So my curiosity is that why are others not citizens? But even if you are not a citizen, why are we not hospitable? And I think what made me stay longer in the university, I could have left really after my first degree. The job market was also bad. But, one of the reasons why I stayed, I'm like, surely it can't be that the other people are also not going to be taught by Black women. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then as I was starting my master's, my university became the first in Southern Africa to have three African women at the realms of power.
Oh, wow.
So vice chancellor, chancellor, and chair of council at the same time. We were the first at that point in Southern Africa. And I was like, if a first year is coming to this university and they don't realize this is a wow moment, that's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know, is a first year coming in and going, damn? Or is a first year just going, oh, okay, sure, I'm just here at university?
What has been the observation there?
I haven't asked them. 2Ks are very scary. I'm a 2K are very scary. I like my peace. So I was like, but also, and so some of the responses that it doesn't matter because of femicide. It doesn't matter. Or the question is, what is the change? And so what I found is that we now cannot celebrate that because now women have to sit with the responsibility of changing the entire society by themselves, who have just taken leadership, have to now change the entire society. That's the burden of being an African woman in leadership now.
Oh God.
It's actually a burden. Yeah.
Just to go back a bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were bothered by the fact that you were raised by a woman who in her own right was a leader.
Yeah.
But then in a space where there has to be inclusivity,
yeah,
women were not recognized as leaders. Are you saying this in the context of them occupying senior positions, or them not having the power that they should be having in those positions? Because here you study 5 women that are in positions of, I would say, authority.
Yeah.
In what context are you saying this?
Yeah. So for me, remember, it literally how I study just my research is really just formed by my parents. Whether it's the art part of what I do, or whether it's the very institutional part of what I do. My mother was a teacher, so you go into the classroom. That's your first engagement with authority. So think of what the schooling system does, is that it models certain principles for how you exist in the world. When they teach you to walk into a line, there are also problematic things about the schooling system, like girls must be this side and boys must be this side. But when they teach you an assignment must be in time, they're teaching you time and doing tasks on time. All of these small ridiculous things they do in school are fundamental when you're in the workplace, when you've got a deadline, when you know how to be in a group with other thinking people. And the teacher is important for facilitating the thinking in the classroom. So when I walked into the classroom and I didn't see my mother, I was the one who was confused. This is a personal experience. I don't know about other people. I was just lost. And then I started realizing that the people that sort of design the structure of the university, who is in teaching and learning, are the people with decision making. It's not necessarily, although the people in the classroom can also are one of the most impactful people, of course, the teaching and learning staff. But part of who becomes teaching and learning is whoever is heading the strategic imperatives. And that's why I started then studying leaders to say, how does decision making look like when women are in charge? Because currently the decision making was a bit risky, was a bit critical. So what does it look like right now? Or what would it look like when women are in power? What informs the decision making? And then for me, it goes back, are we going to see a different person in the classroom if a different decision maker is there? Incredibly so at University X, that has been the case. Since the decision makers have changed. Yes, absolutely. And I think that 2 reasons. It's because the decision makers are African and female. And 2, it's because some of the decision makers who are not African and female believe in transformation and in social justice. So the males believe in transformation and in social justice. Yeah.
Interesting. You mentioned those words there, but I want to go to your article now. I made a note here on what participant A said. And verbatim, we are citizens, but I think we are not fully. We are not those fully academic citizens that we should be. There are a lot of strong women emerging, lots of strong young women leaders emerging. Maybe things will change. I don't know. But it's still very much a masculine space. We know that. Some people say, do we just do we just need to demolish the whole university and start from scratch? Because, it carries this legacy. Can you unpack that for me?
Yeah. That one was a bit of a radical.
I actually got goosebumps as I was reading this.
This was a bit of a radical. And now you must bear in mind, I've gotten to now know them. So I see some of their work. I'm like, that's what. I'm like, do I remember that interview? Yeah. So, I think, and this is the participant that informed this particular article, that citizenship. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting word to use, because citizenship is very linked to belonging. Do I belong? Do I see myself? And so Fees Must Fall doesn't say citizenship, it says belonging. But it was very interesting for me. I'm like, but that is exactly what Fees Must Fall was talking about. The legacy of the colonial university is a legacy that doesn't consider my being as present. So one is saying the space is still masculine. The students are saying the space is still Eurocentric. So it seems to me that there is a convergence of some of the conversations and contestations that all of us are having at different times about this university. All of us are talking about this institution that we absolutely deserve to be a part of. So I don't even think of my participants as a deficit. We're trying to exist in the space. No, these are people who deserve to be in the space.
Yeah.
They've got the qualifications to be there, teach, do research, lead, but importantly, lead. And so for me, it's about, that this particular participant moved me because they could see. It's like, and it's almost, I don't know if it's like, oh, maybe it will change. So there's also doubt. But even in the doubt, the person is saying, I'm still going to do the work that I need to do. And if it changes, it changes. Maybe we should dismantle this entire thing. So they're grappling with all these radical ideas, but they're still grounded in I'm still going to do the work that I do, that I need to do right now. Maybe it will change. And so what I think is so interesting about legacy is that my participants think of legacy as not the traditional legacy that happens in institutions of I train, I mentor you, you become my student, and the legacy is that you think like me. The legacy for them is that the next cohort of African women don't have to be grappling with this thing.
Yeah.
That's the legacy for them. The legacy for them is creating a different culture, not creating someone like me who thinks like me. And I thought that for me, that's what's very profound with those interviews. Yeah.
So their task now, as I understand it, according to them, is to just create an enabling environment for those that are yet to follow, that are yet to come.
Yeah. They're very clear about it. They're very, like, for them, legacy is that the next cohort can't be having the same questions or tensions. It must be easier. It must be easier. And they're also not, I wish the next ones could do this. I wish they could. No, they're not concerned about what your academic project is going to be. What they want the space to be is that the space must be inclusive. What you do with it, it's still your autonomy. It's whereas oftentimes people want the legacy to continue, a specific thought or way of thinking must continue. For them, it's to say if anything continues, is that the space must be socially just. And I'll tell you something that is incredible. I write about it in a different paper, post the thesis, is that all of them are mothers. I particularly, and I make this disclaimer in my master's that I'm not going to ask these people about biographical issues of who they are and backgrounds or whether they're parents. I'm not interested in mothering and putting that burden on them. But all of them sort of come up with these things where some of them being a mother is a key identity, and it also becomes I'm a mother. And part of my nurturing is that I create a specific space for my children. And that's sort of how they lead, is that it comes from mothering as a practice, not necessarily biological, but the practice of mothering. So the thing I didn't want to include in the thesis comes out from the participants. And that's the thing about, research, is that it sometimes can do the thing you didn't think it would do.
That's the beauty of
it, right? And I was like, oh, no. This is not the direction it was going. And I just let it happen. Yeah.
One of the things that come out strongly in the paper is that there's power struggles within the university setting. And one may argue that there's always been power struggles in the academy, and it's not particularly unique to women. I would argue, anybody would argue for that matter. And I think that's why we've witnessed a couple of VCs being axed from universities because it's just the nature of the game. Don't you think that women have missed this realization and mistaken it for invisibility? That's the term you use in the paper, and lack of recognition.
Are you saying, in other words, that women have sort of looked at their struggle as exclusive of all of those things? I think not, because African feminism considers that. So African feminism as a theory considers the different ways in which oppressions happen. It's intersectional, right? In the sense that it knows that today it's my gender, tomorrow it's sexuality, tomorrow it's ableism, tomorrow it's another identity factor. It's the fact that we're in the global south. It's ethnicity and all of that. The beauty of African feminism is that it's a self-reflective ideology that can make room for that. But I think even if you read maybe some of Shireen Hassim's work, she's a political scientist, and she writes on African women and women in movements, in social movements in South Africa. And she writes about how women within the ANC,
Ruth First,
were very clear about, but even think way back to Ndandala, for example, who and Matleke as well, who were not necessarily in the ANC, but were in Bantu Women's League, and then become joined into the ANC. They were very explicit about how women's struggles are linked to the broader liberation of all Africans. And that's the thing we often miss when people have conversations about feminism, especially I've seen it in South Africa. And that's also possibly because of what liberal feminism does, is that it makes the ideology quite exclusive. We're fighting for this, therefore when you don't fight for this, you're outside. African feminists are very clear. My identity is African first before I'm all the other things. Therefore, if there is an African thing we must fight for, African feminists must be part of the African thing too, right? But if I'm part of a fight for African gender, then I expect African men to be part of it too, because it also informs them. So I'm African first before I'm feminist or before I'm woman. And so I'm quite aware of that. I'm quite aware that there are those tensions. What I think liberal feminism has done, and this is the danger of liberalism and neo-colonialism, is that it has observed, and don't think oppression is not aware of how we can make use of different things. We see it even with sex positivity. What it has done, it has created this thing where they said, and I've seen it in different spaces. Sometimes you see it in corporate. Particularly corporate becomes a very interesting case in point, where it says, okay, we must let Black women lead. And what does that do is that it creates tensions in the Black community now. And so you let Black women lead, you give them serious amounts of work. They're outside of the family structures. So you create a tension within a family structure. But what you do now is that you give her work so that she's out of the family structure. Work is not supposed to be this ridiculous thing. Because how, for example, do Western families survive where people are working and they still have sustainable families? Why does it work? And why do ours not work? Why do our families' structures have to be this serious contestation? And so if I were to have a child, I live far from my family. Now I don't have a community that can raise my child. I have to buy my community. I have to pay usisi, no mama, to take care of me or to take care of my children while I go and work. And I must hope that that person can teach my children certain values and certain principles. Whereas if I was able to either work where I was close to home or work in a way where I earned enough money to bring my mother or my grandmother to the person who raised me to raise my children, then I'm able to continue a particular kind of legacy in my family. I don't have to worry about how my children are raised because the person who raised me is raising my children. I can go work freely. But now I have to be at work and I must deal with the anxiety of, is the person at home raising my children doing the thing that I would have done? I don't have to question my mother's raising, But now this is an outsider. So liberal feminism has created an economy where it boosts the economic activity of African women at the expense of their participation into the community. And now sometimes what happens is that it creates tensions for us within the workplace as Africans. You create a stratification of power relations that aren't necessarily existing there, right? And so this is not general. I'm not saying this is everything that has happened, or it happens in every situation. But part of the dangers of it is that it creates that very particular thing. And then, because femicide continues to be on the rise, you still then, after you've been a woman leader, you must still exist in a country where you could be violated on your own campus as a vice chancellor, quite frankly. So the contradiction becomes, I am in charge of this campus, but someone could walk in here and violate me as well. You know what I mean? That is the contradiction of how the system, how liberal feminism has been capitalized to give women power in such a way, but it doesn't create the other things we need in society to protect us, like security, like an efficient justice system, like policy implementation, like what do we need to do what do we need to do in civil society in terms of education, so that as genders, we are not in tension with each other. So I don't know, because I don't work in the labor sector, but I don't know what the thinking was in terms of how qualitatively affirmative action was to be effective. So if you think, for example, statistically, the rates are that more girls or women are graduating, right?
I can attest to that.
Yeah.
In my class, I've got 75% ladies in all my classes combined. 75% more or less. I would say more. And when you look at the number of guys that are actually absorbed in the workspace, it's usually their male counterparts.
And then also now, if you look at the Black society, right? Also, statistically, Black women are more graduates. Where are Black men statistically? Either in prison, on the corner, smoking nyaobe. The very same people we have to negotiate safety with. So the very same people that are dealing with the economic system that has either shut them out because they don't have the qualifications, because of their own decisions, by the way, or has shut them out because affirmative action has not managed to create a balance to say, okay, we need to create a BEE system where we are bringing people in. How do we still ensure that that is healthy? Because what you do in a labor system translates into day-to-day society, at least for some of us. And that is the thing about it, is that colonial institutions make you an outsider in your own community. And so I can be whoever I am in the colonial institutions I work with, and I become aloof to my own community. That's where the tensions begin with genders and people in African society. White people don't have to do that. They don't have to be confused and have contradictions in their society and in their workplaces. Because ekhaya, the person who cleans, umama omnyama, omdala. In the workplace, who's cleaning? Umama omnyama, omdala. For me, who's cleaning ekhaya? It's me as the child at home. Who's cleaning in my workplace? Umama. Now I must deal. It's a whole epistemic mind F. I don't know if we swear on this podcast, but it's not radio.
You're more than allowed.
You know? So how do you expect me to be normal when I clean in my mother's home, but my mother must clean in my office?
I've never looked at it that way, to be quite honest. Yeah. I've always respected our mothers who service us in our workplaces. But I've never seen it in that light.
It's easier because it's not our mothers. But when I was in high school, one of the cleaners was my sister's friend. And my sister as well was a janitor at one of the other schools. So I used to think to myself, how would I feel like if my sister is cleaning Palisa's shit? Why is Palisa not cleaning the shit after she's taken a dump in the toilet? Because Ekaya, my sister would beat me up if I don't clean the toilet after me. Mara eskolweni, she must be cleaning ya Palisa. On why? You know why? So the institutional culture is about, it's not just about saying we must create positions for people. It's about the quality of your well-being in the space. And what we don't capture is the thing that it does to our minds and our souls. It's that thing. And one of the beautiful things that Fees Must Fall came up with in not all universities, but it was insourcing. Because the insourcing, one of the most phenomenal guys were fighting for insourcing at X university. Not everyone got that. Why insourcing was so important. Because some of us come from parents who are gardeners and cleaners. And we know that if they were insourced, they would have benefits. And our quality of life changes automatically. So the university divorces you from your community, so you don't have to think about things like that. When you go home now, you have to switch off and be a different person. I was like, I can't. It can't be that Ausale is a cleaner at the Model C school I go to. And then I must be normal about that when we are back in the township. You know? Of course I respect her, that's not a problem. But it's to say someone else like Carla doesn't think that's weird. Because the cleaner at school and the cleaner at home is the same body. It's not confusing. Institutions are confusing us. And it's creating a serious crisis.
Let's go back to women leaders.
Sorry.
Color. In an ideal world, how should leadership look like? You've got these people that have been empowered, have been placed in position of leadership. Let's use our leaders in higher institutions of higher learning as an example. Yes, we still do have Mama that clean for us in those spaces, and most of them are black. I've never seen a white one, to be quite honest. And but these are also the very same people that would be able to get an aunt to take care of their household duties while they perform at work. But based on what you just stated now, how should leadership look like for these women? And you can use the 5 that you had conversations with as your case.
Look, I'm not an idealist person. I don't live in a kumbaya world. Practically, institutional cultures must be relevant to the institution. That's just the reality of it. So an institution like Fort Hare needs to consider, so it's institutional culture must be relevant to the student demographic that it will have. So if you have a student demographic of 90% African students, Where are the African students coming from? What is the culture of the African students, for example? Then your institutional culture must respond to that. A university like Free State, for example, needs to say, okay, so we are in Bloemfontein or Qwaqwa. In fact, literally Free State is an interesting case in point because it's got a campus in Qwaqwa and it's got a campus in Bloemfontein. And those are two different contexts, communities. So the institutional cultures, so when you are a historically white institution, you're in Bloemfontein, and you must think about, how do I lead? Who is my staff? Who are my students, right? So am I saying that an institution like that deserves to teach only Western things because it's got people of colonial descent? No. An institution like that is historically white, has a responsibility to say, we are now not in a historically led South Africa. We are not now. What then becomes our responsibility? Because all universities have a responsibility and you must respond to your responsibility. That's why one of the best universities, at least in terms of, even in practice, NMU, Nelson Mandela University, is that it has said, well, this is how our students look like. This is where we are located. And we've chosen to be a university in service of society, because one of our campuses is literally in the community. How do we respond to that? And so it creates certain things within the university structure, hubs of convergence, which is about looking at the community as part of your knowledge producers as well. So they create, not create food gardens, but they go into food gardens and they say, look, we need to figure out food sustainability for our students. How are you doing food sustainability? Not, do you guys need seeds? Because we are the university, we can buy them. That's problematic because people know how to sustain themselves, given the space, given the capacity, given the resources. But it's about, how do you think of yourself as with the community? So you equalize the hierarchy, you deconstruct the hierarchy. So a university like Free State would have to say, what is our responsibility as a historically white university in 2023? How do we teach what is in our curriculum? How must the culture be? Do we need to have RAG, and how must RAG look like? How must the courses look like? How must we teach science? And who are the new demographic of students coming into the university? So I can't have and this is lovely, because what my participants have done is that they've been in different universities and they would have different answers to this very same question. And the premise of the answer is that it must respond to the context of where the university is located and how your student demographic look like. Because your student demographics need to also influence your staff demographic. You have to balance a staff demographic so that students can find belonging. And unfortunately, skin and how skin looks like is an important part in terms of how you sort of work on that.
Context and relatability.
Context, relatability, but also where do we need to go to? And how do we balance, how do we work towards where we need to go to?
And I guess that's where community engagement forms a critical part of our institutions of higher learning, because it positions us into understanding the context and directly engaging our local communities.
But also, the other problematic thing about community engagement, and I remember one of the profs I work with, Prof. Kola, was saying, why is community engagement people there? Why aren't we engaging the people? Our community is also the university. So have we done enough education in the community we have? The people who are here, what is the teaching that needs to happen? What is the awareness that needs to happen? Why must we assume people in Sweden need awareness? They are their own community. They're actually not necessarily our community. They are a community close to our community. And so oftentimes universities, and because universities can be corporatist, when you have a corporate responsibility, yours is to say, I need to take money and shift it into a community and go empower a community. That's sort of corporatist language. And when you take that model into a university, you're doing the very same thing. but you're not being a university. A university, you must be self-reflective of self. You must be a teaching space. You must be a thing that must be intentional about changing society.
Yeah.
So you can't adopt the very same problematic culture.
Yeah.
So who's community? And why is community people there that you do an event with Jay when it's Mandela's birthday? And then the rest of the year, they are not community. You know?
And I think you are making a very important point there. I'm going to go back to Prof. Bola, because you just mentioned there.
Yeah.
I've always had issues with how we do community engagement, because it has become more of what our government does, actually.
Right.
Close elections, we go to the communities, we give them T-shirts, and that's it. We campaign, and then we go back for reporting purposes. I feel like institutions of higher learning are following suit. We go there, it's Nelson Mandela Day, we do our 67 minutes, we never go back.
Yeah.
Or we hand out food parcels or seedlings, whatever, and then it's done.
Yeah.
We never go back. So it's more of a charity thing.
Correct.
But what impact are we making to the communities which we are working with is what matters for me. And I don't see that.
But also, to what extent, I agree with you, and to what extent are you learning from the community? Why do you think you are the only one that is teaching?
Yes,
you know?
Because that's the primary purpose for engaging communities, to learn from them.
Yeah.
While you also contribute.
And I think that's where we miss it oftentimes. Universities think that they are the ivory, you're an ivory tower. You're the one that's top of the food chain of knowledge. You must be dynamic in how you think about knowledge. Yes. And again, I mean, my best context is Nelson Mandela University, is that it's approached humanizing pedagogy as a school of thought in terms of teaching. And that says whoever walks into it's Paulo Freire, whoever walks into the classroom is sitting with a repository of knowledge. Wherever the knowledge comes from home, but the knowledge might not be sitting in English.
Yeah.
It's sitting as Xhosa, Sotho, what. They know what politics is. They know Guti. Politics is the fact that at 10 o'clock, get load shedding.
Yeah.
And in 2024, if I vote in a particular way, I'm either going to have load shedding, or the other people are also going to give me load shedding, or I might not get load shedding. Politics for them is the fact that we are supposed to have a road here. There's a person we voted who said they're going to fix a road. They didn't fix a road. So what do? That person goes into a politics class and you're busy telling them Machiavelli, and you're busy telling them about what. And they're not engaging you because who are these Greek scholars you're talking about? And then you assume this person doesn't comprehend the content. They don't comprehend basic political ideas of power and the state and what. And this person will tell you there's a road that's been built half because the tender, 2% of the tender was given to Qinisani, the other tender was given to Sporazi, and then Amaginza came and stole the money, and now we don't have a road. So if you are going to assume that knowledge must look a particular way, and that it must only be, and you are the only one that has knowledge there, then you are still being a colonial university.
True.
Because coloniality is about saying you are universalizing. You are saying knowledge is only this way.
Yeah. And
if knowledge is only this way, it means there must be 5 fathers of science, and they are the only fathers. There's not a mother. There must just be 5 fathers of science,
and that's it.
And the ones who come after the fathers are people who studied the fathers. And I'm just like,
so it's a linear way of thinking.
Very linear, very, very linear. So so African women leaders now have to sit with also that complication to say, and then you have to think about capacity. Who do we have? Where can we find the capacity to do this differently? Will people buy into the vision of us doing it differently? Because doing it differently is a long time. Colonialism was years. They had time. So do we have people that are willing to invest in this in the long game, in the long time?
Flip. I think that's a very important point to make.
Yeah.
I was listening to, and you recently asked me who my favorite podcaster is in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I remember Penuel spoke about this. He wasn't particularly saying it in the context of education, but it was on leadership, African leaders. And he was saying it bothers him that you get white people that complain about an inefficient ANC that has been leading for the past 30 years and is failing to get things fixed, yet they've had enough time. And he looks back and says, you had so many decades to do wrong, and we need to correct all that, and you need us to correct all that in 30 years, 3 decades. It's a bit unfair.
You need us to humanize the things you did, the evil you did, and then we must also then equalize society and include you when you were exclusionary. In this, mina ngikhathele ngabelungu, guys, whiteness, and not white people, whiteness,
because there's a distinction.
There is a distinction. Whiteness bores me so much. Oh my God.
After this, please sit with me. I need to advise you where and where not to go.
I'm from the Northern Cape. I'm from the Northern Cape. Don't stress. I have seen it. I have seen identities. But I probably will go. I probably will absolutely go, and hope that when I teach, there's one or two that will buy into the vision of first recognizing themselves as human and doing the work that they need to do. And that is sometimes the thing Africans must accept. African academics must accept that I can maybe just transform one or two. The colonial and the apartheid system didn't have to worry on that. They said, all of us as whites, we are going to do this very same thing, and all of them bought into it. They don't have to say, I just need one to believe in this. They all believed in it and they all oppressed whoever they needed who was non-white. We just now have to say what is actually possible is one or two.
But then when you do that, you become disruptive. And when you're disruptive, you shake the system. And it scares others, and it becomes a problem. I make reference to Pedro Mzileni. You saw what recently happened, where he recently resigned. And you look at Mamokgethi Phakeng, Lenkabula as well. What happened? Puleng, Lenkabula as well. And which brings me to this point. You mentioned in the paper that the challenges that hinder the success of women in higher education, in the higher education landscape, are institutional cultures of the university, of which women inherit when they enter positional power. So what happens when the leaders in question do not inherit the institutional cultures but choose to be disruptive? Because you're saying that you don't mind changing one or two people in the classroom. So what happens when they choose to be disruptive and not necessarily give in to the culture?
So I'm going to make a very wild example. All right. I'm going to make a very wild example. Imagine a home where for years, for 2 generations at least, because it really just takes one other generation to continue that thing. The father of this home used to dabble in witchcraft. Right? I know. That's why I said I'm going to make a wild example.
God.
The father of the home used to dabble in witchcraft, marries, and he has money, marries a wife. The wife is like, oh, we've got money in this. Realizes after we are married, this is how we make money. Sitwele. Now, for the listeners, but basically, it's a manipulation of the order of life, and it involves doing. It's witchcraft. It's witchcraft. And it's witchcraft has different categories. It's witchcraft. It's a category of witchcraft. And the wife decides, hey, I love the money, so I stay. So because you are doing witchcraft, your spirit is not pure. Of course, you'll never have a pure spirit fully, but you'll always have a spirit that is always ekhanyayo. You know, yalisedi. So you can have a pure spirit, a good spirit. Let's call it a good spirit. It's not pure, but it's good. But because your spirit is not good, now you reproduce with this person, and you are still participating niatagat. When my body must interact nomuntu otagatayo, because for example, sex is spiritual, so my body is also going to inhabit the evil spiritual things. Now my body must now be the host of our future children. Now must give birth to children who in their bloodline have interacted with witchcraft. Fine, there's still chance to change it. But we continue to be this family. We want to be wealthy, wara fish-based. And one day, you know, I'm lazy as a mother. I dabble in the thing. The children wake up while I'm busy. And they participate in it. They participate. Now we have created a generation that is also witchcrafters. Now our grandchildren are like, what the hell is this thing that is happening here? And how do we not do this thing? Two things happen. We've died, and the parents have died. Now the grandchildren are there. Two things happen. And this is where legacy comes in. The children need to either accept that they are part of this lineage, or accept they are part of this lineage and reject it and suffer the consequences of both. The first thing is that if you accept you are part of this lineage, is that we continue with this thing that we are doing.